Good afternoon. Thanks to all of you for joining us today. It's a very exceptional event that we are having in the architecture program and the School of Architecture, Planning and Historic Preservation. As most of you know by now, I started working as the new director on August 1st. Part of my As part of my transition, I had an opportunity to meet with individual faculty during June and July. One of my meetings was with Professor Roger Lewis. Just a few minutes after starting the meeting, I just realized that this is the same Roger Lewis who wrote The Architect, that famous volume that I personally used as when I started teaching about 20 years ago, 19 years ago. So, I mean, we had a fabulous conversation. And then I had another meeting with Professor Ralph Bennett. And I found him just so caring and about the history of the program, that he was trying to educate me on the origins of the program. He generously shared a booklet about the history of the program. And I was just amazed of how exceptional these two retired faculty are, because they did their best to educate me on the history of this program. The level of engagement is exemplary, and I really mean it, because I mean, you are just amazing. Not only they taught me so much, but I got their numbers and I told them that I'm going to just keep calling you when I have a question. And remember, I'm an architectural historian, so I take these things quite seriously. So the other thing that I have noticed is that their passion is really, really endless. I mean, they are extremely engaged in our program. They are passionate about what students are doing and their educational experience in our program. So that's why, after meeting with both of them, I decided to have this panel, and I shared the idea with them. They generously accepted my invitation, and I invited Professor Georgeanne Matthews to chair this panel. And I know that Georgeanne has been working with both Roger and Rolf in the last 5 weeks almost to make this happen. So it's an exceptional event. It means a lot to me, because and for selfish reasons, I wanted to organize this with the help of my colleagues, Michael Esban and Leila Asi, to make sure that we know about the history of this program. One thing that I want to mention is that what we have in the architecture program is a result of the hard work of many people, faculty members, staff members, and many graduates who have been supportive of our students over the years. Even though, unfortunately, we can't have one panel including many of these people, I want to acknowledge every single person who has made a contribution to our program. And every one of you as a student who is making a contribution, you are enriching our experience as faculty members. Our goal here is to learn about our history and respect our origins and work together to move towards a better future. Thank you.
Thank you, Mohammed. Hey, everyone. All things tech. Okay, can everyone hear me? Just raise your hand in the back, all the way in the back. Okay, great. I'm Georgeanne Matthews. Thank you. I am a new professor here, and I am excited to be here. But I also want to tell you a little bit before I introduce these two gentlemen about my experience here at University of Maryland. I have an undergraduate degree from UPenn, but I went to Maryland for my master's and my PhD, and I was warmly embraced by amazing professors, many of whom are seated here, and two in particular, who I have the honor to be sort of moderating this panel. You'll hear from them, and not much from me. I would first like to introduce Roger Lewis. He's a retired architect and professor emeritus here at University of Maryland, College Park. He has 2 degrees from MIT, and he had opportunities to teach at MIT and other schools, and he came here to University of Maryland and really is a founding member of the community, and he's going to talk about that journey. He was in the Peace Corps in Tunisia. In addition to that, he has received multiple awards for not only being a professional architect, but a writer of a column in the Washington Post. And like, how many of you all read newspapers now? Like, raise your hand. Oh my goodness, that's 5 people, including me. Okay, so most of you probably don't have the benefit of being able to look back. But you can, go into our university library, go on Google, you can find these amazing cartoons that he did, which were instrumental, which were provocative, which challenged the notion of how we define the built environment. And he engaged major social issues. So welcome.
Thank you.
Roger. Ralph Bennett. Ralph Bennett is a mentor. Ralph, I don't even know if you remember that you were part of my thesis committee when I was here doing my master's thesis. I taught at another university that shall remain nameless, but Ralph, Robin Hutton taught at that university with me. Ralph came over and helped us. Ralph is a founding partner of Bennett McCarthy Architects. He is instrumental in public policy in Maryland and Montgomery County. He has been, he won't admit it, but I think he's a large part of the Purple Line actually coming to our area. He's challenged sort of NIMBYism, not in my backyard, the idea of developing accessory dwelling units and creating more density and more affordable housing. In addition to that, he's just a wonderful, I'm not gonna call you a peer, but a mentor, and he helps in terms of community activism. And he has been there for me on juries at the school that I taught at with Robin. And he has helped me advise thesis students there. And mention the name of the organization that you're currently with, Ralph, in Maryland, that is doing
Housing Opportunities Commission.
that Housing Opportunities Commission. What's that?
Yeah, okay.
Okay, but I know you probably ran it, and I know that it was significant. And so they're both very modest. We are honored to have them. I'm a professor here, I'm learning, I was a student here, I'm a practitioner, architect, urban designer. I work on housing and I work on impact architecture. I'm a native Washingtonian, and that's all you need to know about me. And we're going to talk about the founding of the school as we kind of move into 2022, 2023. We're regrounding ourselves, right? Because we've all been through a lot. I don't know about you, I'm exhausted. I have 2 pairs of pants that fit me from COVID. It's a lot, and now we're back in studio together, and we need to learn how to be a community. And we just want to talk about the founding of who we were, what we wanted to be, what our pedagogical and sort of curriculum ideals were, and then give us time to engage you guys as students about what we think our future should be. Does that sound good?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so there's a clicker. This thing, all right, origins and futures. I don't know what we're calling ourselves now. I'm new here. Maryland School of Architecture, Planning, Preservation, and Development. Hands up. Is that it? Okay, that's what we're doing. Okay, and that's important because we're redefining ourselves and what our mission is. All right, and that is our home. That is an aerial view of our home. I'm going to come over here and sit with these guys. Can you guys hear me? Okay, so we're trying to make sure that the Zoom people can hear us and then you guys in the audience. And we'll scroll through slides. In general, Roger's going to talk about the history because he was there from day one for about 15 minutes. And then Ralph will talk about the development of the school and really what our 3 focus elements are, and that is teaching, research and scholarship, and our service to the Sounds good. Okay. Roger, welcome.
Thank you. You're going to ask me a question.
Yes. I'm gonna go get, okay, I'm new to this, I'm gonna go get this paper. All right, you can wing it. But essentially, why and how did the new University of Maryland College Park School of Architecture come out? And that's what it was called back in the.
Thank you. Can everybody hear me? I probably can be heard without this, but let me see if I can do two things at once. Hold this and look at my notes. Thank you very much for inviting me. This is really an amazing opportunity for me to dig back into the past. Keep in mind that if you asked me what I had for breakfast this morning, I couldn't tell you. But thanks to something like this book, The Foundation Years, you may have seen this, and also to a whole lot of the images that I still have, I was able to put together an answer to Georgeanne's question. It's hard to believe that in the 1960s, there was no School of Architecture in the state of Maryland. And it was really a combination of the Baltimore AIA, the architects in Baltimore, as well as people here on campus who thought maybe it was time to have a School of Architecture at the University of Maryland. The good news is that in 1966-67, now you've got to visualize 66-67, that was a long time ago. I was much thinner and had much more hair. The state, in those days, appropriated all the funds needed to create a new School of Architecture. It was thanks to a guy named Lee Hornbeck, who was the vice president for academic affairs, who really made it happen. He was wise enough to find and hire John Hill. At the time was 37 years old, which nowadays seems youthful to me. And he was an associate professor at the University of Kentucky, and he was the school's first dean. The other thing about the beginning of the school was the whole campus was not organized the way it is now. The University of Maryland School of Architecture, which was just to be a School of Architecture at that time, reported directly to the UMCP president, an office where Lee Hornbeck worked. So we were not in a division or another academic supergroup. This school and its faculty and dean reported directly to the office of the president. I want to tell you that was a big advantage. That was a real advantage for many years. It was a blessing because we had great control over and influence over the budget that we got, and the state. And this is hard to believe. The state really provided almost all, and the tuition students paid, but between tuition and state support, that was all the money we needed to run this program. The dean and we on the faculty, and there were no people working here who were in the development office. There was no development office. Fundraising was not a big issue at that time. And that has changed. I think maybe all of you know that over the years here and other state universities, state support has dwindled substantially. The funding, in fact, was so ample that it allowed us to create right away a really strong architecture library and slide collection. So within a very few years, we had a really great set of slides and books for the students to use as reference. One of Dean Hill's first tasks, of course, John's first task was to hire faculty and staff. And that very first year, before there were any students yet, he did hire 4 people who I will name. There are a lot more that could be named, but I'm going to name the first 4. They were John Wiebinson, who is the late John Wiebinson. He's passed away. Dale Hutton, who also has passed away. Excuse me. Rick Ekstrom, who is also no longer with us. And then someone who is still with us, I don't know if he's in this room, Bob Bell, who was a recent graduate of Yale University. So there were John and these 4 faculty members really got the school started. I was hired the next year, along with a number of other people that helped get this thing going. The staff, to give credit to the staff, John hired 3 really wonderful staff people. Poppy Radcliffe, you may, some of the faculty who are here may have remembered her, who was the dean's assistant for a long time, and frankly, Poppy ran the school. Betsy Alley, who was the curator for the slide collection and helped that grow to be very, very substantial. And Berna Neal, who was the librarian. And I want to give them credit. I hope all of you appreciate how important the staff were and probably still are at this institution. I've always appreciated them because if I really needed something, I never went to talk to the dean, or I went to the staff people to help, and that never changed. Even before I retired, I still did that. The other thing that John and the faculty were responsible for doing was helping get this building designed. So when the school was created in 1967-68, and the first thing they had to do was figure out where they were going to be. They put us in a number of temporary World War II wood frame single-story buildings in what was then called the Gulch. The Gulch is now, I believe, where a dining hall is situated, or it's very near University Dining Hall, so to the east of us here. And that, I think there was a slide up showing, thank you. There was a slide up showing that building, but you'll get to see that again. Those buildings were where we were housed for a number of years while a new School of Architecture building was being designed. So the other thing the state did, which again, looking back was quite extraordinary, was they provided the funds for building an entirely new School of Architecture building, which you are now sitting in. And John Hill and John Wiebetson in particular were able to meet with the architects, help shape this building. So they're responsible, for example, I think John and the faculty that were here wanted to do certain things that you are enjoying now. The great space was the result of guidance from the dean and the faculty. The juxtaposition of the library, where it is, I could spend 10 minutes talking about all the things they did that were great. Now the challenge was when the building was finished in 19, I'm going to get my years right, 1971, the students moved into this building and they were kind of concerned that this was this concrete and masonry building was a real hard, tough building, whereas the temporary buildings, which were wood frame, gypboard, homosote, was very malleable and soft, and they could cut it up and change it. And it took them a while to get used to being in a building like this. Excuse me. I might mention to you that one of the reasons I am here, the reason I am here is that, I guess we're just running through these. There it is. And the students literally messed around with these buildings, and it was a great learning experience. They began to understand the difference between, for example, a veneer and a structural frame. I got here because of a phone call. I should tell you that one day the Washington Post ran a story, again back in 1968, picture of John, and talked about this new school being performed, and I had no intention of teaching. I, at the time, kind of fled from Cambridge, where the faculty at MIT didn't get along with each other, and I wasn't thinking about teaching. When I saw that there was a new school being created, I thought, well, maybe that's something worth looking into. I picked up the phone and I cold called John Hill, long chat with him on the phone. He invited me out to come talk about my experience as an architect in the Peace Corps. I was in, for those of you who understood, I was in Tunisia in North Africa, which turned out to be a great life-changing opportunity. And I had just been to Russia studying industrialized housing. So he said, come on out, give us a talk. He heard the talk and said, listen, would you like to teach here? And it was an offer I couldn't refuse. So I decided to come try that. It happened to be the same time I was getting ready to open my office, architectural office, where I knew I wouldn't be making any money. So there was also the plus, knowing that I might have at least a little bit of reliable income. I will tell you, I think it was about $8,000 a year. Just put it into context, folks. My first job in Washington in 1967, working for Wilson Faulkner, I was making $4 an hour. You will do much better than that when you graduate from here. The school really got launched very robustly because of the state's commitment and the commitment of the leadership of this campus. So I think that we should be very grateful. I think this building still works. It's probably not large enough now because it was great for a school of architecture when there was nothing else programmatically going on. But I think now my understanding is there's some expansion needed.
This is an image of the first faculty retreat, but I wanted to then ask you about in founding the school. What was your idea about pedagogical goals, the curriculum, the philosophy and structure of the school?
Can you all hear me back there? All right, maybe I don't need this. Oh, yes, I'm sorry. Thank you. Yes. So a lot of decisions were made in the late 1960s. We started with a 5-year Bachelor of Science in Architecture degree, which was later renamed the Bachelor of Architecture degree. The concept was to create a well-structured curriculum, and that meant defining explicit goals as to content and skills for the required courses in each succeeding year of the program. The freshman year prerequisites were trigonometry and introductory calculus, introductory physics. We started the introduction to the built environment, which was a course that was taught here at the school for the beginning architects, freshman architects. It was also an elective available to the whole campus. Many of us, I think you and I and a whole bunch of other faculty taught that course at one time or another. Beginning in the sophomore year, the curriculum consisted of 7 semesters of design studio and then the B.Arch thesis. That was considered the core of the program. And during that very first year, what was called the basic design year, the sophomore year, students, as I think maybe happens now, I'm not sure, just explored conceptual principles of form, composition, graphic representation. They weren't designing complex buildings. They weren't designing buildings for that matter, but they were learning about fundamental principles of composition and design. We also, I should mention at that time, did have in mind that there would be summer study abroad options made available for students. We'll come back to that. Now, obviously complementing the design studio sequence, courses in history, theory, preservation, technology, structural, mechanical, energy conservation was an issue then. Materials and methods of construction, visual analysis and drawing, site planning, professional practice, and principles of urban form, about which you'll hear more later. So the idea was that the students would in fact be learning these things in sync with their design studios. And we expected that the students would be, as they moved through the design program for those 4 years, would demonstrate that they were able to apply some of the things they were learning in the history, theory, and technology courses to their design thinking. The other thing that we were committed to from the outset was the notion of community service. And that resulted in, for many years, this school, through the design studios, took on problems faced by a lot of Maryland communities. And we actually did projects where the studio students would go to a place like Frederick or Chestertown and talk with the people in the town, talk with the leadership, and identify a problem, and then undertake a studio project to actually address the problem. And that is, we tried to be as holistic about it as possible. For example, environmental and natural conditions were a major determinant. And I remember in the early years, Bob Bell and we were teaching a design studio together and actually had the students read Ian McCard's book, Design with Nature, which is not about architecture per se, but it's about how the natural environment influences our lives and how we should be building. What's up? Oh, yes, Savannah, for those of you wondering. I mean, you're probably getting some of this still. The idea, maybe the key idea to convey to you about the beginning years of the school, the late 60s, early 70s, is that we all shared a commitment to balancing theory and practice, espousing, if you will, the Vitruvian principles, not Victorian, the Vitruvian principles of commodity, firmness, and delight. We also were very much focused on cultural and social relevance, as well as beauty and constructability, the value of learning from building. So there was always the notion that the projects needed to be both theoretically based, conceptually based, but also based in the realities of the world of building and social activity and so forth. Those were always major concerns. Excuse me. But we also believe that having this structured curriculum, these overall goals and pedagogical philosophy would not impede creative teaching, design exploration. And that meant that we welcomed diverse aesthetic and functional typologies and judgment was always based on the intrinsic merit of what students were proposing. Now, I say that because we knew from the outset, we were committed from the outset to not being a school, as some schools of architecture were at the time, not being a school devoted to one single pedagogical approach based on either a particular architect, starchitect's attitude and beliefs and work, or based on a singular ideology. We were also, even from the get-go, committed to the notion that urban design and architectural design were inseparable tasks and obligations of architects who practiced architecture and taught architecture. So the notion was always that we would touch all of those bases, not hierarchically, but moving, if you will, moving all of this stuff forward as an ensemble. I think maybe we should, let me just mention, well, the only other thing I wanted to say before we get into the third question you're going to ask me. When this building opened in 1971, Lou Kahn, the architect Lou Kahn, was invited to be the guest speaker. He delivered this very memorable, hyper-poetic, but hard to decipher talk. I remember all of us saying, what? What did he say? He was known for that, but it was momentous because that's when we all felt in 1971 when this building opened, that this was a school that was going to be here for as long as we could possibly imagine, because it was made of concrete and masonry and had a sense of permanence that we didn't have in the temporary World War II buildings in the Gulf.
Early program development, historic preservation. When was historic preservation brought in? Do you remember?
It was, I don't remember the exact year, but it was yeah, well, the historic preservation certificate was, I believe, late 70s.
So next question, what were notable actions, adventures, achievements during the early years? So those early years in the 70s, a great deal of social change happening, there was people on the campus, there was student participation in those events. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, let me begin by saying, as you can appreciate, the first class, about 20 students applied in 1968. There were only 2 women. In my class at MIT, there was only 1 woman. That's That's changed substantially. I think that the events that I remember, that I most vividly remember, had to do with things not just in the school, but happening outside the school. For example, in 1968, some of you probably know that that was the time of the Vietnam War. It was a great deal of unrest in the United States because there were many people, including those of us who served abroad in the Peace Corps. Fellow volunteers in Tunisia, we were all completely convinced it was a mistake. But in 1968, John Wiebenson, assisted by his architecture design studio students, led an effort to build what was called Resurrection City. Probably no one has heard about that. Resurrection City was built on the National Mall, and it was really part of Reverend Martin Luther King's Poor People's March on Washington, widely covered by the national and local news media, the goal being to raise Americans' awareness of poverty in the United States. What's interesting is we are still trying to address the same problem in 2022 that Resurrection City addressed and this School of Architecture was addressing in 1968. Another thing that happened in the early years of the school is a family, the Key family, K-E-A, the Key family made a huge, very generous contribution, endowment to the school. And what that did is allowed us to start a study abroad program. And the first study abroad program, this is the next event I guess I want to mention, in which I and John Hill and Charles Moore were involved, was to take the first graduating class, the class of 72, on a 5-week, really hectic, but it's extraordinary tour of Europe, starting in London, going all the way east to Istanbul, where the students got to swim in the Bosphorus. We stayed with one of our students whose father had a house on the Bosphorus, Kaya Arakoglu from Turkey. We then went from there to Tunisia, where I had served in the Peace Corps, and they explored some extraordinary indigenous structures and villages in the south on the edge of the Sahara, in the Sahara, really, before ending up in probably what I and Charles Moore thought was one of the greatest works of architecture on the planet, the Alhambra de Granada. If you haven't been to the Alhambra, that should be on your list, things you must do when you're young and impressionable. That trip to in 1971, that was substantially supported by the Key Fund. Most of the students' cost for doing it, our compensation as the faculty, this was covered by that fund. I don't know what's in that fund today, but I hope it continued to do other things. That fund also allowed us to create a distinguished visiting professorship. And that, I think that's worth my mentioning more specifically. Each year we would invite a visiting professor, distinguished visiting architect, to come and teach usually in one of the upper level design studios. And from 1970 to 1981, I'm going to tell you who they were. Bill Murtaugh, who was actually a historic preservation professional, Charles Moore, Frank Schlesinger, who actually came here and joined the faculty as a result of this, George Hartman and Charles Wallenroth. George Hartman Cox was one of the most respected firms in the city of Washington. Donlin Linden, who was Charles Moore's partner, who is now in California. Don Linden, John Hill, and I actually did a couple of projects together on the Eastern Shore in the 1970s. Joseph Zalewski, Paul Rudolph is the architect who designed the Yale Architecture Building. Colin Rowe. Colin Rowe was a professor at Cornell who had tremendous influence on the architectural education and the students who studied with him, some of whom are standing in this room. And Stephen Peterson, an architect in New York, and Michael Graves, another architect who's no longer with us. I mean, a number of these people are no longer with us, and but this is just in those first dozen years. Excuse me. Well, I'm looking at my notes. I guess I should mention that in 1970, we had a huge, during the war, we had a huge campus riot demonstration, which involved tear gas wafting across the campus. Late that night, a Molotov cocktail was thrown into one of our temporary buildings, set fire to the interior of the building where Bob Bell and my design studio were. And that destroyed, unfortunately, a lot of the students' work and their equipment and desks. We had intended to have a sandwich and coffee shop in the building. Not until 1976 did that happen. The students came and set that up. It lasted maybe a couple of years before the university said you've got to shut it down because we have contracts with food service companies. And you can't, we're not going to allow you to continue undercutting the companies providing food. That was a big loss. We tried to stop that. I will finish by just saying that we have always managed to successfully get reaccredited. We've had accreditations we've never failed getting accredited, and so that you have to give credit there to your leadership, to the deans and program directors. And so I think that the only other thing I would add, I think we're near the end of my 15 minutes. I've taken you to about 1982. I didn't leave then. I did stick around for another quarter century, which now my colleague Ralph Bennett's going to tell you about.
Thank you so much, Roger. And now we're going to hear from Ralph Bennett, who will talk about those developmental years, the sort of transition, refining what our strength focus was going to be. 1977 to the present. A lot, Roger. Ralph.
Hello, you all, and thank you for your patience. I am not going to give a history of the school for the 45 years I've been here. I can't. Also, my accounting of events is going to be flawed, and it will ignore things that are important. But I hope I make some successful effort to point out what the strengths of the school are. The comments are directed to the students to help persuade you that you're in the right place. I asked my class yesterday if anybody had read the article in the Post about the most regretted and lowest paying college majors. Anybody see that? Very telling. Needless to say, the STEM graduates are far happier where they are than the humanities graduates. And you know why. On the other hand, those of us who are in architecture understand that compensation isn't the only value in the professions and therefore the majors we see. But the important thing about architecture is that it combines both. It cannot be placed on one side or the other. I think that interests us a great deal. I myself wanted to be an aeronautical engineer until I discovered that calculus was too complicated for me and I needed mathematics applied to something simpler, like a building, which doesn't move and therefore doesn't require calculus. But I found that in university, because at the same moment, I was in an architecture program where people drew stuff. And it was just amazing to me. And of course, looked at history, and at various times in my career, looked at things like behavioral sciences for guides to proper design. So this program, the architecture program here and everywhere, is something which bridges the gaps between the gulf between technology and the humanities. And I think that's a strong recommendation for it. I came here as a refugee from the Cambridge, Massachusetts version of the Ivy League because my wife said we're not going to stay in Boston for another year. We had 2 kids, aged 6 and 7. And I happened to have stumbled into a line of work, having helped found a firm in Cambridge, a line of work which is multifamily housing. And Tom Bizzuto was a principal in that firm and had a project on the north side of Baltimore, 260 units of senior housing. And there was enough money in the construction phase to support me for a year or 2. So I said, okay, Carl, we're leaving. And we moved. And of course, when I came down here, I couldn't resist going and looking at the new school in College Park. And I came and talked to Bill Beckhofer, a person who we knew by shared institutional relations, but also Bill was, the administration was quite extraordinary. There was a list of a number of people who were hired by Bill. John Hill was very permissive with his faculty. And I owe my job to Bill, and I think Carl Green does as well, and several other people. Anyway, that conversation led to a part-time position that I held for 3 years here. And of course, I haven't regretted a thing. The first thing that I want to mention, the strongest characteristic of this school is the mutual respect for each other and for everyone else that I found when I got here. And it was in the first faculty retreat that I went to, where the faculty all brought their families. Mine were 6 and 7. This was really quite an interesting affair, but it was friendly, open-mindedness, and it lasted for a couple of days in Berkeley Springs, West Virginia. I mean, what a terrific thing to do. And it was not only welcoming, but encouraged participation, lots of fun, and families were there. This, in contrast to the Ivy League, I don't think so. So that is a significant value here, and I think Mohammed has experienced and expressed gratitude for it as he's found it as well. So we are welcoming, and it continues to be that way. The other aspect I want to mention is serendipity. The school offers the opportunity for chance relationships to begin. That is incredibly important because as we think back over what we have done in our careers, it is dominated by chance. There is purpose, of course, but a school offers an opportunity for all kinds of meetings. And the presence here of distinguished architects, as Roger has shown, and which has continued, as you can see on the plaque upstairs, offers one kind of opportunity. The studio offers another. And you offer the same to each other. In fact, the school has produced an enormous number of marriages. In fact, my partners, Larry Frank and Brian McCarthy, are married to graduates of the school. Well, so there are a lot of benefits of being friendly. So I propose to use 3 categories of activity. I want the students to understand that there are 3 aspects to the life of the academic life of a place like the University of Maryland, which we're looked after. The first is teaching, appropriate. The second is service. And the third is scholarship and publication and activity of that kind. And I want to just touch on some high points I think we can find in the programs here, illustrated perhaps by some. I want to thank Roger for providing levity in case I have any gravity. Want to really commend Georgeanne for being patient with the 2 of us as we go through this effort to go forward. So she frames this question, but I'm telling her what her question is, which is, what's teaching about here? The first point is that studio education is unique in the institution, in university. Everybody wants to do what we do here, and nobody but we succeed at it. It's the envy, as I say, it's the focus of our curriculum, as you have experienced. It's become better organized in the period I've been here. And it's one of the most significant features which you all experience in a routine way is that everybody sees all the work in one of the disciplines. It's all the work of all the students, and faculty seen by everybody. And that's really significant because then we stay in touch with what's going on in the studio courses and with you all. And believe me, there's a good deal of comment back and forth based on that as well. And things like what used to be called a postmortem and has a more satisfactory name now. So the second is that the studio offers connections to the profession and to service, as Roger has described. You know the idea of eminent architects coming, you've heard about that. But there are special studios as well. Of course, the comprehensive studio invented by Amy Gardner is become a model which has been adopted by the accrediting board and is required of architecture programs now, and it started here. Urbanism has become a central question, central issue for our curriculum. We have a lot of people to thank for that. First, of course, is Carl McQueen, who came to us from New York, invented Architecture 654, urbanism, and really invested his life in a culture of understanding the urban environment and the architect's place in it. Secondly, of course, the Congress for the New Urbanism began very near here in Alexandria. Several of its principles, which Blair Zyber has taught here. I'm and a number of my colleagues are signers of the charter for the Congress for the New Urbanism. And I've been professionally, as have plenty of my colleagues, in realizing communities built according to the principles of the Congress for the New Urbanism. So that's really a significant series of accomplishments related to an academic objective. The contributions of our colleagues from Cornell, of course, has been mentioned already. Those of Colin Rose, proteges, Brian, of course, Matt, and others, was really a significant change for the school. It reinforced the objectives that Roger already described about being aware of urbanism and the urban place. In fact, I'm looking back on things that I was trying to find for this talk. I came across a key colloquium of April of 2019, which was entitled Urban Design, Education, and the Present Urban Predicament. It's a fabulous presentation and series of talks. Really significant. It symbolizes the importance of urbanism in the curriculum. Of course, the digital world came here. Steve Sachs initiated it as bringing computer technology into the program, and you all are familiar way beyond any of our abilities. I can't draw anymore. I still have a T-square pencils. But you all do fabulous work, and it's up all the time, and it's great to see. Global awareness is a significant part, of course, of our curriculum, as you all know. The availability of international programs carries on the initial objectives of the school, I think, in an amazing way. And I urge you, obviously, to take advantage of those opportunities because they are life-changing. I just had a brief exchange with a student who's in Florence, and I remember the 5 days I spent in Florence to this day, and she has the opportunity to do the same thing, and they are life-changing experiences. Okay, that's teaching. That's one of the realms that faculty here are required to participate in. The second is service. Roger has mentioned already about the studios that assisted locally. It's important for us all to remember that as a place-based profession, publicly supported by the taxpayers, we have a loyalty to that profession, which is manifest in the activities we provide for them, the resources like leadership, talent like yourselves, research, and contact opportunities. And then, of course, community service comes in all kinds of stripes. And Georgeanne has mentioned one, there are lots of others. Many of us are active in the world outside the institution. And that redounds to the credit of the institution here and provides, I hope, experience for you. Historic preservation I placed in this category because I think essentially David Fogel, when he began the historic preservation interest here, which first became a certificate and now a graduate program, is in fact an effort to draw attention to the historic resources of this region. And of course, in David's case, Dipplin Hall, other Maryland historic sites around the globe. So that is a significant service as well as an academic program. And of course, Linebow is now taking care of it. So service is built into our requirements as faculty and into the scholarship. Scholarship is significant. We provided a table of publications at the back of the room, which I invite you to take a look at. And among those publications, I've placed a set of working drawings. These are not normally understood to be published things. Of course, they are. They're absolutely essential to the kinds of things you are learning to do. Typically, books, of course, are part of the credentials of scholarship, but I certainly want to add practice. And that brings us to the place of professional programs in the university, which is up for debate in many ways, but we defend the legitimacy of professional education in the school by doing the kind of research and publication that the institution demands and beyond it. We pay attention to the professions. We know that the American Institute of Architects and so on are part of our clientele, and they provide a field for experience for us in getting to know other architects. We've been strong in this from the beginning. Publications here go back to before Rogers' book, which I think you'll find on the back table. Even at the beginning of the school, John Hill and his colleagues set up something called the Cadre Corporation, the Center for Architectural Research and Design. It's moribund or maybe comatose now, but it was a structure under which faculty were able to do professional work, often in service, but in the school, place within the school to do it. I think we could use that continuing, but it's important that it's there. Research and scholarship, particularly research, is increasingly important now with sustainability. And that's, of course, illustrated by members of our faculty, including Ming Hu, who recently acquired a PhD in civil engineering, and her thesis had to do with the LEED process and its results. But more to the point, building technology is amplified, I think, in its abilities and its obligations, and it's available here for you as well. So those are the three aspects of academic life, and of course they are settled for the university as a whole on an individual basis by contract, and it's understood how much of each every member of the faculty does. That is established here, and of course it gets very complicated in its delineation, including the idea of professors of practice. I've often asked why there are not professors of research, professors of scholarship, but practice gets a special category, which is good.
Go ahead, it's yours.
Faculty, but don't get me started on that. The program still suffers from some personnel losses as a result of our establishing a school of planning, preservation, and real estate. The architecture program, as Mohammed is learning, could use some more full-time lines. That's not to say that the part-time faculty are not valuable or less valuable. That is not true. because that is the significant way we make connections with the profession, is through the part-time faculty each year. Accreditation was mentioned. I think it's worth noting that David Cronrath is involved in developing the national standards for accreditation, and the school will be going through accreditation. So Roger pointed out we've always been successful at it. I was acting dean for a year, and during that accreditation, the maximum term is typically 5 years. But for you students who are the consumers, this is the equivalent of a license for an architect. So pay attention to what the NAAB requires, because their requirements are listed in each of your syllabi, and it recognizes the fundamental professional basis of this program in the university. So I think that's, I'm sure, an incomplete list, but I wanted to make sure that you understand that you're in a place which is conscious of its value system, which does high quality work in many realms related to these values. And I hope you enjoy your stay.
All right. I hope you guys enjoyed these cartoons from Roger Lewis. Please try to read a newspaper at some point in your life, Joe, to your grandmother or your parents. Pull out one of Roger's columns. They were fantastic, and so they were the backdrop. But we've talked about who we were, what our goals were, the founding. I think there's sort of a transition moment, and I'm kind of here. I'm not speaking as eloquently as these two gentlemen are, but I had the benefit of being taught by both of them. I did my master's here. I did my PhD here. I also have degrees from University of Pennsylvania and some real estate development coursework from Georgetown. I came of age here, and I learned a lot here, and there is a spirit here that is worth continuing. It is 2022. So now we're looking at segueing from teaching, service, and research, who we are now. I just randomly grabbed some images of faculty. This is not everybody, got amazing people here in this room in the front row, but these are people who are doing scholarly work and who are also researching and who are also writing books. Many of these books are in the back of the room. So we just wanted to show you a degree from University of Maryland from MAP. It matters. These are people who are doing impact work. These are people who are making a difference in their community. And these are people who are actively engaged in practice in addition to teaching you. So our shared vision for the future. I don't know if all of you all have read it, but we actually have a new mission statement, and we have 4 key things that we're hoping to achieve. I apologize for actually not memorizing them, but in general, we are looking towards the future to be engaged in the environmental dialogue, to be responsive to climate change, to making students who are committed to community activism, who are committed to learning and engaging in practice beyond the classroom. And we're looking to make a difference. These are the heads of all of your departments: Don Limbaugh, Maria Day Marshall, Clara Inascabel, a new dean, Don Jordan, Mohammed Gharipur, head of planning. In the end, someone help me with the one. Who I've met, who's wonderful. This is your new leadership. These are people that you should get to know. They have great ideas. They are leading you guys into the future. It is worth noting who is actually running your school and who would like to hear from you. Okay, these are just some images from our picnic. So that's all of you guys. We want to finish this with hearing from you. So you heard like who we thought we were.
There's my friend.
What happened in 1971, what our past was about, but you guys are actually our future.
Yeah,
And
good
so
to see you
we
again.
would ask questions today. Like, challenge us. What is it that you want to see from the curriculum? Post-pandemic, who do we want to be? What kinds of studios do you want to have? So we've got another 20 minutes and I'm going to scroll through these last images. That was from our all school faculty retreat. It's all of us. And now we want to hear from all of you. Okay, I'm going to show one final slide because it's important to recognize the people who started this school. These are some of the people who passed on. John Hill was our first dean, Tom Schumacher, Carl Dupuy. I actually did study abroad programs with Schumacher and Carl Dupuy. I had worked on Wall Street and in real estate development in New York City. And when I came to University of Maryland, it was a breath of fresh air. And I thought, oh my God, these are people who care. I did every single study abroad program imaginable. I did the Morocco program. I did Kipling Hall in England. I did the Rome program. So I encourage you guys to do that. I'm going to stop talking. Have this microphone. I guess I will run around or point it to you. Yes, Layla's going to do that. But please ask questions. And this is about our future. What should we be doing? What more can we do? What questions do you have for the panel?
So just raise your hand and I'll come up and hand you this mic.
Can I footnote what was said a minute ago by Ralph? One of the things that I think is worth is when we started the school, we had really 8 semesters, 4 years in which to educate the graduates of the School of Architecture at Maryland. We had a lot less that we had to convey and deal with than we have today. So I think one of the great challenges for the faculty and the leadership here, for you, is that you're still trying to get this all in the same amount of time, but there's a lot more of it.
Hello, is this on? My question is, how do you think sustainability has impacted the curriculum in this building? And do you think that it has completely altered how we think about architecture?
Not enough.
Glad you asked that question because that was a word that I never heard in the first 12 years I was here. It was, we talked about energy conservation, but and when I was at MIT studying architecture, I never even, the word historic preservation term never heard. So I think it's fair to say that it's very, very much with us every day.
Thank you for the question.
It was about sustainability. Is that how you reframe your question? Say it again.
How has it affected the curriculum? Because now we talk about it in almost every class, but I can imagine before the 1990s, it wasn't
Right.
president.
I'm going to poke my head in. Oh, while I was teaching at Catholic University, Brian Kelly emailed me and was like, "We're completely redoing the curriculum." Do you guys want to talk? Lindsay, Julie, come on. Okay. But there was a sincere effort to sort of make sure that every course began to address topical issues. Climate change, to me personally, is the #1 issue that we should be thinking about as the school of the built environment. We have infused it into every single course. And when I was on the outside, asked to come in and kind of review courses to make sure that it had content that was significant, particularly in that area. If you ask Brian, if you ask these people here in the second row who aren't speaking, they have spent a lot of time making sure that your courses are relevant, I think. Do you all want to add to that? Yes. Got it.
Since we're talking about history here, I just thought I would add in that it was in 1998 that Brian asked me to put together the first green design symposium that he required all the students to come to. It was a day and a half. That was back when we used to make people come on Saturday to things. We actually did that. And we had all these rock star people in green design and development come as speakers. And that was when I started, we did like a book group with some books, David Orr's book, Earth in Mind. He came to speak. And that's when we started offering the first sustainable design studio and seminar back in the late 90s. So we've been doing it for a while here at Maryland. And it's just taken a while to.
I thought you said you wasn't coming. Said you wasn't coming.
Not a specialty course the way it was at first, but part of every course, every history and theory, every seminar, everything. Because it's the water we swim in now.
I gotta change. I gotta change.
I should say, I
Shorts.
remind you that I'm retired. However, what I see, I've got a question from Matt Bell in the back. But what I see is first Cooley's.
Oh, we pretend we're on Sesame Street.
Saying, I hate because I'm going to my daughter's birthday and I'm like, I'm gonna take my freaking car.
Me too.
My spot.
No, my car's already open.
I am.
Yeah,
so there's-
She's gonna go get her car and take your spot.
Look at the way buildings are being.
Oh, no, I'm leaving too.
Okay,
I have to go over there to get my car.
Requirements for
'cause I'm-
building
I'm-
are changing.
I know.
In fact, those of you who are.
Take your car. No, let's take your car. You're not taking my car.
School who works for a sustainability certifying consultancy. And it became clear as I spoke with her that the role, for example, of contract documents is way more important than we recognize in the curriculum now. Because that's where the data is that you all will have to even develop to make your buildings lethal as consciousness of sustainability goes forward. But I see only parts of things and call upon to, for example, do a little talk on considerations of sustainability in preliminary design, which we can do and must do, don't necessarily do. So, Matt?
So my aspiration is to someday be invited to sit down at that little table and offer my reflections on my 30 years at the school, but that's sometime in the future, not yet. But anyhow, one of the things that's interesting about architectural education seems to me is to reflect upon the kind of discussions and topics that remain constant versus things that change. And the school's changed a lot in the time I've been here, but also there are some things that haven't changed. And what's sort of interesting, and I don't mean that in a bad way, I actually mean that in a good way. There are some foundational things that Roger spoke about that seem to me to amazingly have carried forward all these many years. Maybe you two could speculate a little bit on what changes you might see coming and how one uses the sort of foundation of things to perhaps stay in place to be able to handle the things that we see coming to us in the future.
That's good.
I think that what this reminds me of is when I was the last 5 or 6 years I was here, I was the thesis program, the master's thesis director. And I remember talking to students in the 90s, late 90s, about sustainability. And I remember saying more than once that our aspiration was to have sustainability be thought about as the notion of accessibility. After the ADA, I think you all know what I'm talking about. That it got to the point where I told the students, look, we are going to assume that you're going to be designing whatever it is you're designing to be accessible, be something that I don't need to have a special seminar anymore or a lecture on accessibility, because I think, thanks to Ralph, I mean, I know you focused on this a great deal. So ideally, what we should be aspiring to do vis-a-vis sustainability as we move forward in educating students is to have sustainability become inherent in your thinking about every aspect of design from pre-schematic to final CDs and construction. So I think Matt's made a really good point. There are some things I think that are really immutable. For example, I still tell students, I still write about and talk about and told students that the only one theory that I think never changes is the theory that it seemed like a good idea at the time. Just remember that. Remember, it seemed like a good idea. But I think there are some things that are going to change, and you just have to be prepared to figure out how to make, if there's something like sustainability, how to make it something that's just integral to your thinking.
Hi, I'm Emily. I'm a junior in the Bachelor of Science program. And something I've noticed with the curriculum is we're taught technical courses like structures, but it's not really reinforced in studio. Do you think that could be a potential growth in the curriculum?
That's a hard question, because bringing all of the factors that affect architecture to play in any given studio is very difficult. But I tend to agree that the evaluation of designs from early conception based on considerations of, for example, building efficiency, could get a little bit more emphasis in the studio, because it does affect the form of the building. When you limit glazed area by code, you have to learn how to deal with buildings that have windows, and it's coming. And we also, by the way, are going to have to deal with the energy efficiency of existing buildings, because climate action plans are mandating building performance standards, which are going to require existing building owners to make changes that they had not planned to make. That's separate. I tend to agree.
I think part of the answer, I'd like to put a plug in for ARC 600. I mean, I don't know how it's, I assume we have some people here who know all about it. I taught in it once upon a time. I think that studio, it really is intended in part to address exactly what you're talking about, which is to have students take on a project that's not so immense that they can't begin to really integrate all of these other things that you've been learning in these other courses in that studio.
Amy, does you want to speak up?
So there's a couple of pieces to this. One is that we, as was pointed out, we can't do everything all at once all the time. And the studios build incrementally. Every studio, more stuff gets added onto it. And it's true that the integration of structure into the design studio problem reaches its nadir, apotheosis, I'm not sure which, in 600. And because we sort of see the curriculum as 4 years, not 2. And so, you know, you're not going to see it incorporated with incredible depth or yet. That said, we are looking at ways that structure and its development can be integrated into every studio at the appropriate level.
Anybody else have a question that they'd like to add?
Maybe there's some answers.
I can't help it. So one of the things that I think is really important to think about for the students out there and sort of where I was going with my question, which perhaps I didn't phrase very well, is that in life, there are things which are constant and things which are change and that change. And I think one of the things about architectural education is it's really important to figure out what is the basis from which you see things. Because many different things will occur over the course of time. But what is the lens you see these things through? And I think that one of the things that I've found in teaching here that has been, you know, a growing, was certainly a value that the faculty expressed when I first arrived, and the one that I think has grown over time, is these two poles of building great communities, and Roger cited service work that students did and things like that, and also building well, which relates to sustainability. Building great communities means that looking at places, real places, and understanding why they really work well. And as Amy was talking about, understanding how to build well in a sustainable way so that we're being good stewards of the environment. Trends come and go. You know, there was postmodernism, there was deconstructivism, there was all sorts of things that have washed through architecture schools over time. What strikes me about this place, and I've been at other schools, is that the school absorbs the trends. It doesn't say no to the trends, but the trends are always weighed through the lens of the core values, so that the students get instilled with a way of seeing the world in terms of sustainability, starting with settlement patterns and extending all the way through to how you design and build a building. And that becomes the measure by which you look at all these other things as they wash through the tabloids and the magazines and the architecture schools and things like that. So for me, you know, with the students, and one thought I would want to leave with them is this idea of what are the core values that the school espouses, and how do those core values help you see the world as it evolves? Because it will evolve, it will change, but the values and the sort of stands you make as designers and as citizens in the world are not based upon lurching back and forth between trends. They're based upon what you really have learned to be true in terms of building a better world at a bunch of different scales. And I think that's a really important takeaway that Roger was saying started with the school, continued through people like Ralph and Carl coming. I remember interviewing and thinking to myself when I interviewed here, geez, these people aren't just arguing with each other all the time. They're actually exchanging ideas and talking and talking about shared interests. Because where I came from, when I first came here as assistant professor, the place I was coming from, it wasn't like that. And that collegial sense of having those shared values and being able to talk about them in a way that honestly puts things on the table and kicks around ideas is underappreciated and undervalued. I just want to leave the students with that as a thought, that it's something that doesn't occur in every location. I think these gentlemen sitting in the front of the room have been a big reason why that sort of ethos has sustained itself over time.
I'm fearless. We don't impose this, it's inevitable. It's as inevitable as my leaving, that you are coming and you are the profession of the future. It's a fact, it's not an imposition.
Any final questions? Hi, Maisha. Layla, do you want to go over the microphone?
Hello, and first, thank you for this talk. I think it's really interesting to hear more about the school after being here so long, both as undergrad and grad. I've noticed with my interactions with students at other programs within the area, how much our education has differed from them. So I guess my question is like, how do you see the program standing out the rest within this area? Like, what would you think really makes this program unique?
Maisha, is Maisha right? How is our program unique? How are we special within the world of architecture? And there was a little bit more.
How do you see, like, how would you describe that uniqueness as we continue going forward? Like, what will keep us standing out?
Okay. How are we unique? How would we describe our uniqueness? And how are we going to continue that into the future? And you were pointing at Conrad. What Matt said.
Yeah, I agree with Ralph. I mean, I think that I think this program has always been, let me use the word holistically structured, holistically pursued. A lot of architecture school programs, and I visited a number of schools and over the years, tend to emphasize certain things over other things, that prioritize things or give greater weight to things that I think don't necessarily merit having that stress put on them. So I think I used the word earlier about balance. I used the word balance. I think this program is always enjoyed, and the students have always appreciated the balance that we've achieved here. And I think if we had some Maryland alums who've gone on to practice and teaching, in addition to Georgeanne, I mean, I think you would agree with this. I think they would tell you the same thing, that they were not indoctrinated here. A lot of schools tend to indoctrinate students to some extent.
I circulated to everyone, I think, an article from the most recent architectural record, which described how schools were branding themselves as emphasizing decarbonization. Well, yeah. I mean, that's part of the problem. But to imagine that you would allow your program to be publicized as having that as a focus just isn't sufficient. But of course, the media tend to encourage that kind of thinking and we absorb it. But that's an illustration, not paying attention to basics of the kind that Professor Bell described so well.
Any other questions?